Hello, I'm Seth Kelly,
And I'm Kellie Kelley.
and I'm here today to tell you my cancer story. Early September of 2019, I was shaving like I always do, and I noticed a lump in my throat on the side of my neck. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it. I just kind of went on my daily thing, and after a couple weeks, I realized it didn't go away. And so I got Kelly, and I said, "Hey, I think something's going on." And so she said, "Well, let's call the doctor." So, of course, I called the doctor, and my family care provider, my typical doctor. And a couple of weeks later, I got in to see him, and he said, "What are you here for?" And I showed him the lump in my neck, and immediately he could tell there was something wrong. And so he mentioned a couple things, but cancer never was talked about. And so he referred me to an ear, nose, and throat doctor in our local hospital. And so I made an appointment and met with him. During that appointment, as he was examining me, it was the first time I'd heard the word cancer. And so, of course, we were scared to death. And he referred me to a pathologist to have a biopsy done. And so once the biopsy came back, of course, we met again with the ear, nose, and throat doctor. And of course, our worst fears had been confirmed. I was diagnosed with squamous cell carcinoma. And at that time, it was only in a lymph node. And so there was no primary, or they could not find exactly where it was coming from. And so he believed it was in a tonsil, and that because I was HPV positive, that and the way I was presenting in the office, that it was probably in one of my tonsils, specifically my right tonsil. So shortly thereafter that, they scheduled me for a tonsillectomy. And at that point, they took out my right tonsil, sent it off, and had pathology done. And sure enough, that's where the tumor had started and was located. And so everything from that point on was kind of accelerated. And I mean, it's an unbelievable shock to be told that you have throat cancer. And at 50 years old, I was in the prime of my life. Excuse me. Uh, it's still really hard to talk about. Um, I actually asked him at that point, I would like a second opinion, and I wanted to go to a cancer center. And so he referred me down to IU, downtown Indianapolis, at the Simon Cancer Center. And I met Dr. Sim and Dr. Derm. And from that point on, those two gentlemen or doctors were basically my primary care providers, and they started to guide me through the process of what it was going to be like. And shortly after I met with Dr. Sim, he explained to me the process that I was going to go through and all the things that were going to happen. He was not, I don't know the right words, I guess, but he was not shy to tell me that I was going to go through hell, and that my experience would be extremely difficult. But I think at that point, I realized I had a lot of people on my side, and he told me that we were going to beat it. And so we scheduled a surgery to have, at that time, what's called a radical tonsillectomy, where they removed all of the material left over that still had cancer that had spread from the tonsil. And they also removed my left tonsil, and obviously had to check it for any cancer. And then during that procedure, I also received what was called a neck dissection. And so once those were done, I came home to recover. Extremely difficult recovery. And during that time, this was COVID. COVID was raging in our communities, and everything was locked down. So I spent all of my recovery and surgery alone, no visitors, phone calls, FaceTime. And I went through a really, really difficult time with pain medicines were making me sick. I was on a feeding tube, and I was in the hospital for about 5 days. And Kellie was trained how to be a nurse over the phone on how to use a feeding machine, how to administer medicine. And they sent me home to recover. And for the next 4 to 6 weeks, I would say, we struggled. It was very, very difficult. The pain, I wasn't able to eat. Obviously, Kellie's not a nurse, and had to make an emergency trip to the emergency room because I'd gotten dehydrated. It was just an extremely, extremely difficult time. But because of all the support I had at home and the continuation of being able to talk to the doctors and the nurses on the phone, we got through it. And I actually went back to work for about a month. From that point on, the pathology came back, and it had spread to a couple other lymph nodes. And so the recommendation was that I start 7 weeks of
Maybe I can pick up the story a little bit. So after Seth had recovered from his surgery, he was consulted by his primary care oncologist, and they recommended just to give that extra assurance to go ahead and proceed with chemotherapy and radiation. And so he received what is now probably more than what's recommended, but he was given what was the traditional amount of radiation and chemotherapy over the next 7 to 8 weeks. He had mentioned earlier that, coming home to recover and to be cared for by a non-medical person was a shock. It was a shock to all of us, especially because there were very little home health aides that were available at that time, especially due to COVID. And so we were kind of left, it felt like, on our own, in addition to having a very serious diagnosis for the first time ever in our lives. And so as we talk about the story, it's pretty fresh. And what we're learning now is that even though his physical body continues to recover and is really almost back to prior to surgery, there are a lot of other issues that are left behind. And he can speak to that a little bit more. But the emotions kind of indicate how a cancer experience affects you. And, as he'll tell you probably later on, we were really in the prime of our lives. We were high school sweethearts. We had known each other since we were 14, and we had lived a pretty good life and a long life. And we didn't get married until we were 27, and we've raised 2 adult children and done fairly well for ourselves. But this is one of those experiences that kind of reminded us how vulnerable we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's still pretty fresh. I went back to work, and I had a great employer at the time with great insurance. And I had the best medical care that money can buy. I had a boss that was super helpful and lenient and allowed me to come back slowly. And then approximately 2 months after during recovery and after my surgery, I started 7 weeks of chemoradiation. Every Monday, I'd have an infusion of cisplatin that it's
I don't think we realized it was going to be this challenging today.
No, so
you never know.
Mondays were cisplatin, and then every day was radiation. I had to be put back on a feeding tube, this time through my stomach, because I couldn't eat, drink, swallow, difficult talking. What you thought your daily life was going to be was no longer. But through a lot of determination and some wonderful nurses and doctors, they helped guide me through it. And I learned how to embrace the suck, is what I was told by my Dr. Sim. Told me, you're going to have to embrace it, and you'll get through it. And There were times halfway through treatment that I didn't think I was going to get through it. I'd succumbed, that I'd be on a feeding tube forever, and that, you know, my life was going to be different. But as long as I was alive, I was okay. So we eventually grinded our way through and rang the bell. And I'm here to tell you, ringing the bell it's not over. It's really about the halfway point. I continued to struggle with eating and drinking. I was burnt pretty severely from radiation. I'd lost all my energy. I'd lost about 50 pounds. It's tough. It's really tough. I was a shell of who I used to be. And so, you know, it took it took an army of people to get me through everything I had to go through. And I really want to make a point in that access to healthcare, a quality vehicle.
Yeah. I mean, we realized for as much as we felt like we were suffering and trying to overcome this monster of a diagnosis, that had we not had the kinds of resources, the family, the transportation, the good job with the good insurance, it just was really humbling to realize how many thousands of people don't have the same access. And, you know, our outcome, Seth's outcome, was going to likely be more favorable than many would have been. And so that was not lost on us. As much as we were struggling as a family, we realized educating people about especially the type of cancer that Seth acquired, and some of the ways that can be prevented, quite frankly, all of those things kind of kept rushing in and made us realize that we had an important role to play for the prevention of this type of cancer in the future. And so this is why we struggle through sometimes this conversation, because it's not an easy experience to relive.
No, and you know, one story in particular that I can think about, and I think about this nurse all the time. Her name was Leslie. She was my infusion nurse, and it was probably halfway through my treatment, week 5 or so, and I was struggling. I was just in a crappy mood, and I was sick and weak, and had lost a lot of weight, and she could tell I was having a bad day. And we were always, you know, super positive. I was normally positive, and she said, "What's going on today, Seth?" And I just started crying. And I told her how bad I felt and how sorry I felt and couldn't believe I was going through this and I didn't deserve it. And I think it made her frustrated, or it triggered something in her, because she quietly told me, you know, you need to suck it up. You're going to get through this. And I want you to look down about 3 stalls. And there was a young woman that was going through some sort of cancer. And she said that woman, that young girl, is not going to make it. And you will. And so it really put it in perspective what I was dealing with, and the opportunity I had to fight it and to get through it. And the odds were in my favor. I had good health care. I had great doctors and nurses. I was young. I wanted to fight, and I had a good prognosis, where she did not. And she didn't make it. She didn't come back. And so, you know, can't excuse me, cancer is real, and people don't think it's going to affect them until it does. And I think it's very important that families take time to research the vaccination, about getting their kids the HPV vaccine. And there's a lot of people that don't even know that the vaccine is available, or that HPV causes cancer. And ironically, Kellie and I knew that we had been exposed many, many, many years ago. But until we were dealing with it and I was diagnosed, we had no idea that what it would do to change our lives forever. And quite frankly, sitting here today, 100% cancer free and as healthy as I've ever been, it probably made me a better person. And it's made our family stronger. And it's certainly put life into perspective and what we are grateful for. And, you know, our journey's been extremely difficult. But at the end of the day, I'm 2 years cancer free. And I want to thank all the doctors and nurses. You know who you are, that wake up every day to do this, to save people's lives. And don't take it for granted, because you might need them someday. And I want to thank everybody for listening to my story. And please get your kids vaccinated.
I just want to thank Seth for being able to tell his story as he does. And it is a tough story to tell. And, you know, one of the things that I think often gets forgotten is that not only is there a patient going through a cancer journey, but anyone who loves that cancer patient is on that journey with them. I think it's important for caregivers to know, and primary care providers, our doctors and our nurses, to know how important it is for that integrated care piece, so that the mental health, the emotional health, the spiritual health of a family really is what helps rally around a cancer patient. That too is an important lesson that we learned from our experience.
Absolutely.
So again, thank you for allowing us to tell our story.